The Forgotten Little Farm. Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to another literary journey that will deeply touch your hearts. Today I'm going to tell you a truly special story, The Forgotten Little Farm, a narrative about abandonment, overcoming, and the transformative power of brotherly love. Imagine two small children, João Carlos, only 10 years old, and his little sister, Ana Paula, 8, abandoned in a settler's house, lost in the interior of Minas Gerais. What would you do if you were completely alone in the world, with no one to protect you? This is a story about how the human heart can flourish even in the most difficult circumstances, about how kindness can emerge in the most unexpected places. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I want to know every corner of the world that follows us. And don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our exciting stories. Year 1999. Diamantina region, interior of Minas Gerais, Brazil. The March rain drummed on the colonial tile roof like tears the sky shed over the old settler's house. João Carlos woke to the sound of truck wheels pulling away down the dirt road, swallowed by the morning mist that wrapped around the mountains of Minas Gerais like a grey shroud. The 10-year-old boy rubbed his brown eyes, still heavy with sleep, and felt something different in the air, a silence that cut deeper than any scream. Marlene had left. Ana Paula, his voice came out in a hoarse whisper, as if he was afraid to break the terrible spell that hung over the adobe and wood house. His 8-year-old sister was huddled in the corner of the iron bed, her dark eyes wide like two deep wells reflecting fear. Her disheveled braids framed a pale little face that seemed to have aged years during the night. "She's gone, João," murmured Ana Paula, clutching against her chest a rag doll that grandmother had made years ago. "Marlene is gone." João Carlos felt his chest tighten as if an invisible hand were crushing his lungs. On the rough wooden table, a note was folded next to a bag of flour, some handfuls of beans and 3 blocks of rapadura. "I need to settle the estate in the county seat. I'll be back soon. Take care of each other." The stepmother's trembling letters danced before his eyes like poisonous snakes. Settle estate. The children didn't really know what that meant, but João Carlos had the strange sensation that Marlene was lying. There was something in the haste with which she had packed the few things the night before, in the way she had avoided looking them in the eyes during the silent dinner. The house breathed loneliness. Each floorboard creaking under bare feet seemed to whisper stories from other times, when the property buzzed with life. Now only the morning wind entered through the cracks in the poorly fitted windows, bringing the humid smell of wet earth and wild pitanga trees that grew wildly in the yard. Ana Paula got up slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the landscape stretched in green and golden undulations as far as the eye could see. The mountains looked like sleeping giants, and on the horizon a solitary heron flew toward the stream that cut through the property. "She's not coming back, is she?" asked the girl without turning around. João Carlos swallowed hard. At 10 years old, he felt the weight of being the oldest, the protector. He approached his sister and put his hand on her shoulder, feeling how fragile her little bones were under the cotton nightgown. "I don't know, Anna. But," he breathed deeply, searching for courage he didn't know where it came from, "we're going to be okay. Dad always said that the land takes care of those who take care of it." The boy looked around the house. The cast-iron stove still had warm coals from the night before. A clay pot hung from a hook. There was a kerosene lamp on the sideboard, and through the back door he could see the well where they came to fetch water. Maybe they could survive. Maybe. But when Ana Paula turned around and João Carlos saw the silent tears streaming down his little sister's face, he realized he knew absolutely nothing about how two children could live alone in the world. The first week passed like a misty dream. João Carlos woke every morning expecting to hear Marlene's heavy footsteps through the house, the familiar noise of the kettle on the fire, the creak of the chair where she sat to drink coffee with milk sweetened with rapadura. But there was only silence. Ana Paula had developed the strange habit of talking to herself, or rather talking to the rag doll as if it were a real person. Sometimes João Carlos caught her whispering secrets in the toy's ear, telling it about her fears and dreams with a seriousness that broke the boy's heart. "Dolores says it's going to rain again today," announced Ana Paula one morning, while arranging the doll in the chair next to her. João Carlos had learned not to question his sister's conversations with Dolores. If it comforted her, so be it. It was on one of those mornings that the boy discovered the barn. He was exploring the back of the property looking for firewood when he found the wooden construction half hidden behind a clump of bamboo. The door was stuck from humidity, but gave way with a few pushes. Inside, like forgotten treasures, there were old tools covered by years of dust: hoes, machetes, a long-handled sickle, empty burlap sacks, and in a corner, a rusty tin full of seeds. "Anna, come see!" he shouted, and his voice echoed across the property like a bell of hope. The girl came running, her braids flying behind her like ribbons in the wind. When she saw the interior of the barn, her eyes widened. "They're seeds from Dad's time," she whispered, taking a handful in the palm of her hand. "Corn, beans, squash." In that moment, something changed between them, as if a spark had lit a small but constant fire in their chests. They weren't just lost orphans in an abandoned house. They were the heirs of a land, the continuers of a story. Juan Carlos began experimenting with the wood-burning stove. At first he burned his fingers and filled the house with smoke, but gradually he learned to control the fire, to choose the right wood, to light the kindling with old paper he found in drawers. Ana Paula, for her part, proved to be a natural explorer. She discovered that there was a loaded jabuticaba tree in the back, that the chickens from the former resident had become wild and laid eggs hidden in the woods, that the stream had a deep pool perfect for catching lambaris. It was on one of these expeditions that they found Thunder. The dog was whimpering softly near the fence, a back paw caught in an old, rusty trap. It was a medium-sized mutt, brown and white coat, golden eyes that asked for help without making noise. "Poor thing," murmured Ana Paula, approaching slowly. Juan Carlos examined the trap. It was one of the old models, probably forgotten by some hunter. Carefully, he managed to open the mechanism and free the animal. Thunder, the name Ana Paula chose because of the hoarse sound he made in his chest when he was happy, stayed. He simply settled on the porch as if he had always lived there, and the children discovered that having a companion made all the difference. The dog seemed to understand that he needed to take care of them as much as they took care of him. He barked when strangers approached the property, helped find eggs in the woods, and slept stretched out on the doorstep, a faithful guardian against the fears of the night. "Now we're a real family," declared Ana Paula one night, while the three of them cuddled near the stove. "You, me, Dolores, and Thunder." Juan Carlos smiled. For the first time since Marlene had left, he felt that maybe they really could survive alone. But deep in the night, when the wind howled between the tiles and the sounds of the forest seemed closer and more threatening, he still wondered how long two children and a dog could live completely alone in the world. The answer would come sooner than he imagined. Mr. Antonio spotted the little white smoke rising from the chimney of the old settler's house on an April morning, when the fine drizzle made the world grey like faded watercolor. For years that property had remained empty, ghostly after Francisco died, and left the widow with two small children. The 68-year-old farmer stopped the red Ford pickup on the side of the road and scratched his greying beard. Could it be possible that Marlene had returned? But hadn't she taken the children to town months ago? Curiosity was stronger than prudence. Antonio got out of the pickup and walked along the trampled grass trail that led to the house. Thunder appeared first, barking low but without aggression, as if announcing the arrival of an expected visitor. Then he saw the two children. Juan Carlos was stacking firewood under the porch, his thin little arms struggling with logs that seemed too big for his age. Ana Paula was hanging clothes on an improvised clothesline, humming softly a little song that Antonio recognized from his own childhood. They looked, well, not exactly well-fed, but without the appearance of abandonment he would expect to find. There was something almost magical in the scene, two small children taking care of a house as if they were miniature adults. "Good morning," said Antonio, removing his straw hat. Juan Carlos raised his eyes, alert. Ana Paula stopped hanging clothes and hid halfway behind her brother, but without the exaggerated fear she would show if she were really alone and abandoned. "Good morning, sir," replied Juan Carlos with the politeness his father had taught him. "Where's your mother, boy?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Juan Carlos exchanged a quick look with Ana Paula. They had agreed on what to say if someone appeared. "She went to town," said the boy, and his voice sounded almost convincing, "to settle some papers at the registry office. She'll be back soon." Antonio nodded slowly. He knew that type of necessary lie well, that instinctive protection children develop when they feel threatened. He himself had lied to adults when he was small, to protect secrets he didn't even know were important. "And you're managing well here alone?" "Yes, sir." Ana Paula spoke for the first time, coming out from behind her brother with her chin raised in a gesture of dignity that deeply touched the old farmer's heart. Antonio looked around. The garden had signs of recent care. The chickens that had become wild seemed to have been domesticated again. He could hear them scratching in the yard. There were washed clothes drying on the line, cut and stacked firewood, signs of organized life. "Do you know who I am?" "You're Mr. Antonio," said Juan Carlos. "Dad talked about you. He said you were a good man." The old farmer felt something tighten in his chest. Francisco had been a good man, hard-working and honest. He had died too young, leaving the family in a difficult situation. "How about if I took a look at this house?" he suggested. "Maybe I could help you with some things while your mother doesn't return." In the following days, Antonio established a routine. He arrived mid-morning with his pickup loaded with tools, supplies, and mainly, knowledge. He taught Juan Carlos the difference between good and rotten wood, how to fix broken tiles, where to find the best stones to make a more efficient wood-burning stove. For Ana Paula, he brought selected seeds and vegetable seedlings, teaching her about moon phases and the best time to plant each thing. The girl proved to be an applied student, with delicate hands that seemed to have been born to make life grow from the earth. "My father planted according to the moon," commented Ana Paula one afternoon, while they transplanted lettuce seedlings. "Your father was wise," said Antonio. "The moon commands the waters, and we are made of water. It's natural that it influences us too." He also brought stories. He told about the ancient times of the region, about the banderantes who passed through there looking for gold, about the slaves who took refuge in the mountains and formed quilombos, about the families who built farms and raised children on that generous land. "This property has good energy," he said one afternoon, while the three rested on the porch watching the sunset tinge the mountains pink and gold. "I always knew it." "Your father knew how to choose a place." Juan Carlos and Ana Paula exchanged a look. There was something in the way Mr. Antonio spoke of the land, as if it were a living person, a being that could be friend or enemy, depending on how it was treated. "Do you think we can stay here?" asked Ana Paula, her voice small but hopeful. Antonio looked at the two children. In recent days, he had noticed things that perhaps they themselves didn't know. The pantry was well stocked, but with food that would last a short time. There weren't enough winter clothes, and mainly, there was no trace of Marlene's return. "I think you can stay wherever you want," he said finally, "but maybe it's time to find out exactly what belongs to whom around here." The children didn't completely understand what he meant, but something in the old farmer's voice reassured them. That night, Antonio returned to his own house with a heavy heart and a working mind. He knew Marlene wasn't coming back. A woman doesn't abandon two children in an isolated house for so long if she intends to return. And if the children were going to stay, they needed to stay properly, with papers, with legal protection, with guaranteed future. It was time to meddle in matters he might prefer to leave quiet. But Francisco had been his friend, and those children were all that remained of him in the world. Fernanda appeared on a May morning like a ghost materialized from the mist that rose from the stream. Juan Carlos saw her first, a girl about 9 years old, too thin, with worn clothes and eyes that seemed to hold secrets too old for her age. She was drinking water from the well, her cupped hands bringing the crystalline liquid to her lips with the delicacy of someone who knows each sip is precious. Thunder didn't bark. He just observed, his head tilted, as if evaluating whether the intruder represented danger. "Ana, there's a girl here," called Juan Carlos softly. Ana Paula appeared at the door, still holding Dolores against her chest. The two girls looked at each other for a long moment, as if they were recognizing each other from some past life. "I'm Fernanda," said the newcomer, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Ana Paula, and this is my brother, Juan Carlos. And the dog, Thunder. Pretty name." The conversation was like that, simple, as if all the important introductions in the world could be made with few sincere words. Fernanda didn't explain where she came from or where she was going. She just stayed. First only for lunch, corn flour with scrambled eggs that Ana Paula prepared. Then for the afternoon, helped Juan Carlos fix a fence. Then for the night, curled up in a corner of the porch, observing the stars with an almost religious concentration. "You can sleep inside," offered Ana Paula when the dawn cold began to bite. "No need," murmured Fernanda. "I'm used to the outdoors." But Ana Paula was already spreading a blanket over her, and Juan Carlos brought an improvised pillow made of folded clothes. That's how Fernanda became part of the family, without ceremony or formal discussion. She simply fit into the routine like a piece that had always been missing. She had different skills from the other two. She knew how to find medicinal plants in the woods, could identify animal tracks, had an almost supernatural intuition for rain and weather changes. Her small hands were agile for delicate work, like making fish traps or braiding baskets with bamboo. "Where did you learn these things?" asked Juan Carlos one afternoon, watching her prepare an herbal tea that promised to cure the cough Ana Paula was developing. "At the orphanage, there was a nun who knew about plants. Sister Conceição. She taught me before she died." It was the first time Fernanda mentioned the orphanage, and the other children realized they shouldn't ask more questions. Everyone had their stories, their wounds that hadn't completely healed yet. When Mr. Antonio appeared the next morning, he found 3 children working harmoniously in the yard. Juan Carlos digging a hole to plant a fruit tree, Ana Paula transplanting spice seedlings, Fernanda weaving a fence with bamboo to protect the garden. "Good afternoon," he greeted, removing his hat as always. "Good afternoon, Mr. Antonio," they replied in chorus. The old farmer immediately noticed the presence of the new girl. She looked at him without lowering her eyes, but without challenge, just a mutual evaluation between 2 people who knew how to recognize honesty when they found it. "This is Fernanda," introduced Ana Paula. "She's our sister now." Antonio nodded. He didn't ask where she came from, or if she had family looking for her. In the countryside, some questions aren't asked, because the answers can be more painful than ignorance. "Nice to meet you, Fernanda. I'm Antonio, a neighbor from here." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Antonio." In the following days, the old farmer observed how the dynamics among the children had changed with Fernanda's arrival. She brought a strange balance. She was older than Ana Paula but younger than Juan Carlos, wilder than both but also wiser in certain things. Mainly, she brought an instinctive understanding about survival that the other 2, raised with the minimum of family care, didn't yet completely possess. "We need to dry fish for winter," she commented one afternoon, "and gather more firewood, and make soap with the stove ashes." It was as if Fernanda were an ancient spirit trapped in a child's body, someone who carried memories of times when surviving wasn't guaranteed, but daily conquest. Mr. Antonio realized that maybe Fernanda was exactly what the other 2 children needed, someone who would teach them that life could be difficult, but there was always a way to continue. One night, after the children slept, he stayed on the porch smoking his cornhusk cigarette and observing the stars. Thunder came to lie at his feet, and the old farmer scratched the animal's ears. "Now there are 4, he murmured to the dog, 4 souls needing protection." Thunder sighed deeply, as if understanding the responsibility that weighed on all of them. In the room, the 3 children slept side by side on the floor, sharing blankets and pillows in an intimacy that spoke more about true family than any official document could express. Ana Paula had her arms stretched over Fernanda, who in turn held one of Juan Carlos's hands. It was as if, even sleeping, they needed to be sure that none of them would disappear during the night. Mr. Antonio put out his cigarette and sighed. It was time to resolve those children's situation once and for all, but first, he needed to discover exactly what Francisco had left behind. The tin was buried at the foot of the pitanga tree, wrapped in waxed canvas and protected from humidity by layers of oiled cloth. Juan Carlos found it on a June afternoon, digging to plant coffee seedlings that Mr. Antonio had brought. The metal hit the hoe with a dry sound, different from the soft earth. The boy called the other children, and the 3 dug up the container with the reverence of archaeologists discovering a lost treasure. "It must be from Dad," whispered Ana Paula, recognizing the handwriting on the label stuck to the lid. "For my children, when they need it." Juan Carlos's hands trembled when he opened the tin. Inside, protected by more layers of plastic, there were yellow documents, some photographs, and a letter written in Francisco's careful handwriting. Fernanda held her breath while Juan Carlos unfolded the papers. She still couldn't read very well, but she realized from the siblings' seriousness that this was important. "It's the land deed," murmured Juan Carlos, trying to decipher the formal and complicated words. Ana Paula approached, pointing to a line in the document. "Look here, Juan. Francisco Almeida dos Santos, owner of 25 hectare, and down here is the date, 1995. 4 years before Dad died," calculated Juan Carlos. Francisco's letter was easier to understand. "My dear children, if you're reading this, it's because I'm no longer here to take care of you. This land is yours, always was and always will be. Don't let anyone say otherwise. Take care of it and it will take care of you. Your father who loves you forever, Francisco." The 3 children remained silent, absorbing the meaning of those words. The property where they lived, where they had learned to survive, where they were happy, was legally theirs. When Mr. Antonio arrived the next day, He found the children waiting for him on the porch, the documents spread on the table like cards from a very serious game. "Mr. Antonio," called Juan Carlos, his voice firmer than usual. "We need to talk to you." The old farmer approached and examined the papers. His eyes went over the deed, recognizing the stamps and signatures from the Diamantina registry office. "Francisco was smarter than I imagined," he murmured, a sad smile on his lips. "He registered the property in his name 2 years before he died." "So the land is really ours?" asked Ana Paula. "It's yours, yes, but—" Antonio stopped, thinking about how to explain legal matters to 3 children. "You're minors. You need a legal guardian until you become adults." "What about Marlene?" asked Fernanda, speaking for the first time about the stepmother of the other 2. "Marlene never officially adopted you," explained Antonio. "She was just your father's wife. With his death, she had no legal right over you or the property." Juan Carlos felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Then why did she leave and abandon us here?" Antonio sighed deeply. "I think she knew that, boy. She knew she had no right to the land. Maybe she thought that by leaving she was doing the best for you. Or maybe," said Fernanda with bitter wisdom, "she simply didn't want to take care of 2 children who weren't her daughters." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Everyone knew Fernanda was probably right. "What happens now?" asked Ana Paula. "Mr. Antonio looked at the 3 children, 2 orphans and a runaway, living alone on an isolated property, surviving with courage and ingenuity. From a legal point of view, the situation was very complicated. From a human point of view, it was simply a family that had formed naturally. Now," he said, "we're going to the county seat to talk to Dr. Expedito. He's a lawyer and justice of the peace. He'll know how to regularize all this properly." "What if they want to separate us?" asked Fernanda, her voice small but determined. "What if they want to take us to an orphanage?" completed Ana Paula. Antonio looked around the property, the flourishing garden, the chickens scratching in the yard, the well-kept house, the children healthy and obviously loved by each other. "They won't want to," he said, and his voice carried a conviction that surprised even him. "You created a family here, a real family, and real family is sacred even if it's not on paper." That night, the children slept embraced more tightly than usual. They knew that one phase of their lives was ending and another was about to begin. Outside the window, the full moon illuminated the property with silver light that made everything seem magical. The land that was theirs, the house that was theirs. The family they themselves had built with love, courage, and a determination they didn't even know they possessed. Juan Carlos was the last to fall asleep, looking through the window at the mountains that surrounded his property. His property. For the first time since Marlene had left, he felt truly at home. The Diamantina registry office smelled of old paper and beeswax. Dr. Expedito was a middle-aged man, prominent belly and glasses that slipped down his nose when he concentrated on some important document. He received Mr. Antonio and the 3 children in a room lined with shelves full of dusty cases. "Interesting situation," murmured the lawyer, examining the deed that Francisco had left. "The property is correctly registered in the deceased's name, but the children need legal guardianship until they reach adulthood." Juan Carlos, Ana Paula, and Fernanda were sitting in a row of wooden chairs, wearing their best clothes, which weren't many. Fernanda held Ana Paula's hand with enough force to mark her fingers. "Dr. Expedito," said Mr. Antonio, "I would like to apply to be the children's guardian." The lawyer raised his eyes above his glasses. "Are you related to them?" "Not by blood, but Francisco was my friend, and the children have been living on the property next to mine for months, under my informal protection." "And where is the stepmother?" Antonio and the children exchanged glances. "Marlene left 3 months ago," said Juan Carlos, his voice firm. "She said she was going to settle the estate but never came back." Dr. Expedito made some notes on a pad. "I'll need to officially summon her to resolve the children's legal situation. If she has no interest in guardianship, we can proceed with the transfer process." 3 weeks later, Marlene appeared at the registry office like an embarrassed shadow. She was thinner, with new clothes but tired eyes of someone who carried heavy guilt. The children saw her for the first time since the abandonment, but felt no anger, just a distant sadness, as if looking at a stranger they had once known superficially. "Marlene," began Dr. Expedito, "you were summoned to define your legal situation regarding your late husband's children." The woman looked at Juan Carlos and Ana Paula, then looked away. "I can't take care of them," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I never could, actually." Francisco was the one who knew how to deal with children. Then you formally renounce guardianship. I renounce. The word fell in the room like a stone in a deep well. And the property? Asked the lawyer. As the deceased's wife, you would have right to part of the inheritance. Marlene shook her head. The land always belonged to Francisco. He bought it before we married, with money that wasn't even mine. And, she looked quickly at the children, I don't want anything that's theirs by right. Dr. Expedito prepared the documents right there. Marlene signed the guardianship renunciation with trembling hands, then also signed a formal renunciation of any right to the property. When she finished, she looked one last time at João Carlos and Ana Paula. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't know how to be a mother to you. Then she left the registry office and they never saw her again. Well, said Dr. Expedito, adjusting his glasses, now let's regularize your situation. The process was simpler than expected. Mr. Antonio was named legal guardian of the 3 children. Fernanda was also included, since she had no documentation or known family. The property was officially transferred to João Carlos and Ana Paula, with Antonio as administrator, until they reached adulthood. What about me? Asked Fernanda when they left the registry office. You're our sister, said Ana Paula simply. When we turn 18, we'll divide everything in 3 equal parts. Mr. Antonio smiled. Those children had learned about justice and generosity without anyone needing to teach them. Back at the property, they celebrated with a special dinner, free-range chicken that Antonio had brought, rice with piqui that Ana Paula had prepared, and dulce de leche that Fernanda had made with a mysterious recipe she had learned, who knows where. Now we're a family with signed papers, joked Juan Carlos, raising a glass of jabuticaba juice. Family with signed papers and true heart, corrected Ana Paula. Fernanda said nothing, just smiled. For the first time in her life, she had a place that was definitely hers, people who wanted her not out of obligation or charity, but by choice. That night, Mr. Antonio slept in the house for the first time, in the room that had been Francisco and Marlene's, now his by right of guardianship. But he didn't feel like an intruder. He felt like the adoptive grandfather of 3 extraordinary children who had transformed abandonment into opportunity, loneliness into family, fear into courage. Outside, Thunder patrolled the yard with the awareness of an official guardian. The property now had owners recognized by law, guaranteed protection, assured future, but mainly it had love. And that, thought Antonio before falling asleep, was everything any house really needed to become a home. 2 years passed like gentle seasons on land that had learned to love its new children. Juan Carlos was now 12 years old, and his arms were beginning to show muscles of a boy who worked seriously. Ana Paula, at 10, had proved to be a natural farmer, with almost magical intuition for making plants grow. Fernanda, at 11, had developed wisdom about animals and herbs that impressed even the oldest neighbors. The property had transformed. Where before there was only weeds and abandonment, now stretched an exuberant garden. Ordered rows of corn, beans, squash, and cassava created a green mosaic that changed tones according to the light of day. Ana Paula had convinced Mr. Antonio to invest in a small dairy cattle operation, and now 3 gentle cows grazed in the pasture that Juan Carlos had fenced with his own hands. The free-range chickens multiplied and provided eggs for the family and to sell at the Saturday fair in Diamantina. Fernanda had developed a special line of homemade products, fresh cheese, dulce de leche, sausage seasoned with herbs she gathered in the woods, artisanal soap that left clothes smelling like wild lavender. You've become little entrepreneurs, Mr. Antonio would joke on Saturday mornings, loading the pickup with products for the fair. The Diamantina street fair happened in the central square, between the municipal market and the main church. It was a world of colors, smells, and voices that the children had learned to navigate with the skill of experienced merchants. Donna Julia, who had sold spices and medicinal herbs for 40 years, had become a kind of mentor. Little Ana Paula, she would say, examining the perfect tomatoes the girl had brought. You have the gift. These plants grow because they feel they're loved. Juan Carlos specialized in talking to male buyers, mainly the farmers who came to town to shop for the week. He had a knack for explaining the advantages of organic agriculture, how they had abandoned chemical poisons and returned to the old methods his father had taught him. Plants raised with care grow better, he would say with the seriousness of an adult, and food raised with care feeds better too. Fernanda preferred to stay at one end of the stall, observing the movement of the square and taking care of the more delicate products. She had developed the habit of making small drawings on brown paper to wrap the sweets, and soon customers began specifically looking for the little artist girls' packages. The money they earned at the fair was managed collectively. Part went to property improvements, part for supplies they didn't produce, and a small amount was kept in a savings account that Mr. Antonio maintained at the bank. "You need to think about the future," he explained to the children. "Good land always appreciates over time, but you'll also want to study, maybe travel, see the world." It was during this time that Professor Mario appeared in their lives. The state had implemented an itinerant rural education program, and the professor visited isolated properties once a week to give classes to children who couldn't attend regular school in town. Mario was a young man in his 20s, graduated in pedagogy from a university in Belo Horizonte, but passionate about rural life. He arrived Monday morning on a noisy motorcycle and spent the entire day teaching mathematics, Portuguese, science and history under the shade of the jabuticaba tree in the yard. "You have an advantage over city children," he would tell them. "You learn in practice things they'll only see in books." Professor Mario's classes were different. When he taught fractions, he used the division of fair profits as an example. When he explained botany, he walked through the garden showing the different types of roots, stems and leaves. History was told through regional legends and stories that Mr. Antonio knew about the first inhabitants of the mountains. João Carlos proved especially interested in mathematics and science. He dreamed of better understanding the land, discovering ways to make plants grow even better, understanding the natural cycles that governed life in the countryside. Ana Paula fell in love with literature. The professor brought borrowed books from the municipal library, and she devoured stories of distant places, different peoples, impossible adventures. Then she retold the stories to Fernanda and João Carlos on winter nights, creating her own versions that mixed books with their real experiences. Fernanda demonstrated special talent for drawing and understanding people. She made surprisingly accurate portraits of neighbors who visited the property, and Professor Mario was impressed by her ability to observe details that others didn't notice. "That girl has an artist's eye," he commented to Mr. Antonio one afternoon. The official evaluations of the educational program always placed the three children among the best in the region. It wasn't just the knowledge they acquired, but the maturity, responsibility, and ability to work as a team that impressed supervisors. "Their children raised with purpose," observed an educational inspector during a visit. "They know why they do what they do." As months passed, the property began to attract attention from neighbors and people from town. It was impossible to ignore the transformation. Where before there was an abandoned house, now a small, prosperous and organized farm had flourished. Other rural producers in the region began seeking out Mr. Antonio, asking for advice about the techniques they were using. João Carlos and Ana Paula were consulted about organic farming and sustainable cattle management. "You've created something special here," said Father Joaquim during a visit he made to see the orphan children's property, about which so much was said. "You've transformed abandonment into prosperity." But the real prosperity, the children knew, wasn't in the productive land or the money from the fair. It was in the afternoons sitting on the porch watching the sunset tinge the mountains golden, in the mornings waking to the rooster's crow and the smell of fresh coffee, in the nights telling stories by the stove while thunder slept stretched on the floor. Prosperity was having a place in the world, and they had found theirs. The year 2002 brought changes no one expected. João Carlos, now 15 years old, had grown so much that Mr. Antonio had to buy him new clothes twice in the same year. Ana Paula, at 13, was developing the natural grace of country girls who grow up among plants and animals. Fernanda, also at 14, had revealed herself as a young woman of discreet beauty and ancient wisdom. The first big change was the arrival of electricity. The government rural electrification program finally reached that remote region of Diamantina. João Carlos would never forget the night they tested the first light bulb, a simple 40-watt bulb that transformed the kitchen into a magical yellow and warm place, completely different from the flickering light of the kerosene lamp. "It's as if the sun entered inside the house," whispered Ana Paula, amazed. With electricity came other possibilities. Mr. Antonio invested in a small refrigerator, which allowed better storage of dairy products and expansion of cheese production. They bought a blender that facilitated the preparation of juices and vitamins, and mainly, they installed an electric pump in the well, ending the heavy work of drawing water manually. The second change was the rural telephone. The line arrived along with the electric poles, and suddenly the isolated property was connected to the world. The telephone rang for the first time on a September morning, and the three children looked at the device as if it were an alien. "Does anyone know how to answer this thing?" asked Juan Carlos. It was Professor Mario calling to warn that he couldn't come that day because of a family emergency. After the conversation, the children kept looking at the telephone with a mixture of fascination and distrust. "It's strange," commented Fernanda. "His voice was here, but he was in town." The telephone also brought new clients. The fame of the children's little farm products had spread, and soon they began receiving direct orders from restaurants in Diamantina and even Belo Horizonte. Ana Paula developed a handwritten catalogue of available products: cheeses, Minas Fresh, semi-aged, creamy cottage cheese, sweets, milk, guava, papaya, fig, smoked meats, sausage, loin, payo, seasonal vegetables, always organic, free-range eggs, wild honey that Fernanda had learned to collect from natural hives. "We're a real company now," joked Juan Carlos, watching Ana Paula note orders in an agenda that Professor Mario had given them. But the biggest change came through an unexpected visit. Dr. Helena was a professor of sustainable agriculture at the Federal University of Minas Gerais and had heard about the property through an article in the regional newspaper about successful experiences in family agriculture. She appeared one October morning driving a faded Jeep, accompanied by two agronomy students carrying notebooks, cameras, and measuring instruments. "Would you allow us to study the techniques you've developed here?" she asked after introducing herself. Mr. Antonio looked at the children, who exchanged glances quickly before nodding. What followed were 3 days of intense observation. The researchers measured garden productivity, analyzed soil samples, photographed the composting techniques that Fernanda had perfected, documented the crop rotation system that Juan Carlos had implemented, following advice from the region's older farmers. "It's fascinating," commented Dr. Helena one afternoon, taking notes while observing Ana Paula prepare seedlings. "You combine traditional knowledge with intuitive innovation in a way we rarely see in commercial properties." "We just do what works," said Ana Paula simply. "Exactly, and that's real science." The study resulted in an academic article published in a sustainable agriculture magazine. Suddenly, the small Diamantina property was being cited in universities throughout the country. As an example of regenerative family agriculture, they began receiving visits from other researchers, students, small producers interested in learning the techniques they had developed. Mr. Antonio built a small reception area in the yard, with wooden benches under the shade of the jabuticaba tree, where the children could explain their methods to visitors. Juan Carlos discovered he had a natural talent for teaching. He could explain complex concepts simply, show in practice how soil nutrient cycles worked, demonstrate the economic advantages of organic agriculture. Ana Paula developed an informal course on productive home gardens. She taught town housewives to produce food in small yards, using techniques adapted from those they had developed on the property. Fernanda specialized in medicinal plants and environmental education. She took groups of city children to walk in the woods, showing how to identify native species, explaining the importance of preservation, telling indigenous legends about plants she had learned from older neighbors. "You've become teachers," observed Professor Mario during one of his weekly visits. "We just tell what we learned," said Fernanda. "That's exactly what the best teachers do." Over time, the visits became regular. Groups of rural schools came to see the property. University classes made technical excursions. Urban families brought children for country life experiences. The 3 orphaned children who had been abandoned in an isolated house became regional references in sustainability and family agriculture. But most importantly, they continued being siblings, continued sharing dreams and responsibilities, continued caring for each other with the tenderness they learned in difficult times. At night, after visitors left and the telephone stopped ringing, they gathered on the porch as they always had. Thunder, now an elderly and wise dog, stretched between them. Mr. Antonio smoked his corn husk cigarette, telling stories of the region, and the mountains remained there, eternal and silent, keeping the secrets of a family that had formed not by blood, but by the daily choice to love and protect each other. In 2006, Juan Carlos turned 19 and officially became the legal owner of his part of the inheritance. Ana Paula, at 17, was about to reach adulthood as well. Fernanda, who had never known her exact age, was officially registered as 18 years old based on estimates from orphanage documents. The property now extended over 30 hectares. They had bought neighboring lands with profits from recent years. What had begun as an abandoned settler's house had transformed into a model farm, visited by agricultural technicians from throughout the state. Juan Carlos had specialized in sustainable agriculture through correspondence courses and regional workshops. He had developed a drip irrigation system using recycled plastic bottles that became a model for other small producers. His garden produced year-round, providing fresh vegetables to restaurants in 3 neighboring cities. "You should study agricultural engineering," suggested Dr. Roberto, a university professor who regularly visited the property. "What for?" replied Juan Carlos with a smile. "I'm already doing in practice everything I would do after graduating." Ana Paula had become a specialist in rural education. She gave informal classes to children in the region, teaching from basic literacy to agricultural techniques adapted for small properties. She had created a community library in an abandoned house they bought in the nearest village, where she lent books and offered free tutoring. "The girl has a way with teaching," commented Donna Maria, mother of 5 children who attended Ana Paula's classes. "My boys learned to read with her better than at the town school." Fernanda had developed an almost mystical reputation in the region. Besides knowing medicinal plants better than trained pharmacists, she had become a midwife, helping in the birth of at least 20 babies on neighboring properties. Her delicate hands had a special gift for bringing life into the world, safely and lovingly. "Little Fernanda has the touch," said Donna Rosa, the region's oldest midwife, who had passed her knowledge to the young woman. "She was born for this." It was during this time that love came into their lives. Juan Carlos fell in love with Carmen, daughter of the veterinarian who cared for the region's cattle. She was a 20-year-old young woman, graduated in accounting, who came to help her father on farms on weekends. She was practical like Juan Carlos, dreamy like Ana Paula, and wise like Fernanda. "This girl is perfect for you," said Ana Paula after meeting her. "She has the same light in her eyes that you had when you found that buried tin." Ana Paula found her love in a more complicated story. During one of the university student visits, she met Rafael, a young man from Belo Horizonte studying journalism, who was doing a report on sustainable agriculture. He was enchanted not only by the property's story, but by the intelligence and passion with which Ana Paula spoke about rural education. "How you could come to the capital," he suggested during one of his several visits. "There are universities, opportunities." "What for?" replied Ana Paula, echoing her brother's response. "Everything I want to do, I can do here." Fernanda took longer to fall in love, but when it happened it was with an intensity that surprised everyone. Antonio was a young indigenous man from the Zacriaba ethnicity who visited the property as part of a cultural exchange between rural communities. He understood plants and animals with ancestral wisdom that perfectly complemented the knowledge Fernanda had developed. "He teaches me things I didn't know, Fernanda explained to Ana Paula one afternoon. The 3 weddings happened in the same year, 2009, in a celebration that lasted 3 days and brought together more than 300 people at the property. Mr. Antonio, now 75 years old but still vigorous, was the one who blessed them. "Oh, you gave me more children than I dreamed of having," he said emotionally during the ceremony. "And now you give me grandchildren too." The 3 houses were built at different points on the property. Juan Carlos and Carmen stayed in the original house, which they expanded and modernized. Ana Paula and Rafael built a wooden house near the community library. Fernanda and Antonio erected an adobe house at the back of the property, close to the woods, where she collected her medicinal plants. "We're a village now," joked Rafael one morning, seeing the 3 chimneys releasing smoke in the morning landscape. The children began arriving in 2010. First came Miguel, son of Juan Carlos and Carmen, a boy with bright eyes who seemed to have inherited his father's interest in the land. Then was born Clarice, daughter of Ana Paula and Rafael, a curious girl who at 2 already wanted to read all the books in her mother's library. Finally came Fernanda and Antonio's twins, Luna and Sol, names that reflected the parents' connection with natural cycles. "Now we have a new generation," said Mr. Antonio, holding Miguel while observing the plantations, "and they'll grow up knowing where they came from." The property continued prospering. It had become a reference point for sustainable rural tourism. It received visitors not only from Brazil, but from other countries interested in successful family agriculture models. Juan Carlos had developed a technical course in sustainable agriculture and rural management that attracted students from various universities. Ana Paula had created a rural literacy program that was adopted by other regions of Minas Gerais. Fernanda had established a network of traditional midwives who provided basic medical care in isolated communities. "You've created a legacy," said Dr. Roberto during a visit. "Not just a prosperous property, but a life model." But for them, the real legacy was in the afternoons when the three families gathered on the porch of the original house. The children played in the yard where they themselves had grown up, under the same trees, drinking water from the same well, hearing the same stories Mr. Antonio had told for more than a decade. Thunder had died of old age in 2008, sleeping peacefully on an autumn afternoon. He was buried under the pitanga tree where they found the tin with the inheritance. Now there were two other dogs on the property, Storm and Gale, puppies the grandchildren had adopted, who continued the tradition of family guardians. On full moon nights, when they sat on the porch listening to the owl's song and the distant murmur of the stream, Juan Carlos, Ana Paula and Fernanda sometimes remembered the morning they woke up orphaned in an abandoned house. It seemed like a different life, lived by other people. But then they looked at the mountains that never changed, felt the familiar smell of wet earth, heard their children's voices playing in the yard, and knew they had always been home, always. In 2013, the 25-hectare property had transformed into a state reference. What had begun as a survival experience of 3 orphaned children was now studied in universities and cited in public policies for sustainable rural development. Juan Carlos, at 26 years old, had become an informal consultant to the state government for family agriculture programs. He traveled the region guiding other producers, but always returned to his land at the end of the day. Carmen managed the commercial part of the property with the efficiency of someone who understood both numbers and people. "I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur," commented Juan Carlos in an interview for an agricultural magazine. "I just wanted the land to continue being our home." Ana Paula, at 24 years old, had expanded her educational program to 12 municipalities in the region. Her community library had become a small rural university, offering from adult literacy to advanced technical courses. Rafael documented all the work, creating pedagogical materials that were distributed free to other communities. "Education isn't luxury," Ana Paula would say in her lectures. "It's a basic necessity, like water and food." Fernanda, at 25 years old, coordinated a traditional medicine network that served more than 50 rural communities. She had trained dozens of midwives and healers, creating a bridge between ancestral knowledge and modern medicine. Antonio helped her with indigenous knowledge that perfectly complemented her practical experience. "Plants heal when there's love in the preparation," she taught in her courses. That never changes. The property received more than 1,000 visitors per year. University students, international researchers, government delegations, rural tourism groups, urban families seeking authentic experiences. Mr. Antonio, now 79 years old, had become a kind of venerated patriarch of the region. His stories about the property's early times had become legendary, told in schools and universities as examples of how generosity can transform lives. "I just helped," he would say when praised. "Those who worked the miracle were them." In 2015, the property was declared Rural Cultural Heritage by the government of Minas Gerais, recognizing not only its economic importance, but its role in preserving traditions and traditional agricultural techniques. The recognition ceremony was held at the property itself, with the presence of the governor, state secretaries, university rectors, and representatives of international rural development organizations. "This property represents the best of rural Brazil," said the governor in his speech. "It shows that it's possible to prosper while preserving traditions and caring for the land." But for Juan Carlos, Ana Paula, and Fernanda, the real heritage was in the details official visitors didn't see, in the smell of fresh coffee Carmen made every morning, in the sound of children playing among fruit trees, in the sensation of humid earth between fingers when planting seasonal seedlings. Miguel, Juan Carlos's son, now 5 years old, already showed interest in plants. He spent hours following his father through the garden, asking endless questions about why some plants grew better than others, how soil creatures helped roots, when was the best time to harvest each fruit. "This boy is going to be a better farmer than his father," commented Carmen, watching her son examine a tomato seedling with a scientist's concentration. Clarice, Ana Paula's daughter, at 3 already read books to any adult who had patience to listen. She invented stories mixing characters from tales her mother told with day-to-day situations on the property. Her narratives always ended with someone finding a family. "The girl has a storyteller's soul," observed Raphael. "She'll continue her mother's work, but in her own way." The twins, Luna and Saul, Fernanda's children, at 3 years old, were completely different. Luna preferred playing alone, observing insects and birds with infinite patience. Saul liked being always surrounded by people, was first to greet visitors and had a smile that melted hearts. "That girl is going to be a researcher," Fernanda would say about Luna, "and that boy is going to be a diplomat," she'd complete about Saul. In 2018, the property was included in an international sustainable tourism route, receiving visitors from Latin America, Europe, and Asia interested in community rural development models. A Japanese family spent a week on the property, documenting agricultural techniques to implement in rural communities in Japan. A group of French farmers came to study the composting methods Fernanda had developed. Mexican students spent a month learning about rural education with Ana Paula. "The whole world wants to learn from you," said Dr. Roberto during one of his visits, now a family friend for more than 10 years. "We just did what had to be done," replied Juan Carlos with the same humility as always. But something deeper was happening. The property had become a symbol not only of technical success, but of how love and persistence can transform abandonment into prosperity, loneliness into community, despair into hope. Journalists came from large urban centers to write reports about the miracle of Diamantina. Documentarians filmed the family's routine. Social researchers studied how 3 orphan children created a community life model that worked better than many government policies. But at dinner time, when the 3 families gathered at the large table Juan Carlos had built under the jabuticaba tree, they were just siblings sharing food, stories, and plans for the next day. Mr. Antonio, now 82 years old, continued telling stories to his great-grandchildren, the same regional legends he had told his adopted children years before. His voice was weaker, but his eyes maintained the same brightness of kindness that had won the trust of 3 abandoned children on a March morning in 1999. "You gave me a larger family than I dreamed of having," he said one night, looking at the children playing in the yard. "And you gave me the chance to see a miracle happen." The miracle continued happening every day, in the land that produced healthy food, in children who grew up knowing where they came from, in traditional techniques that were preserved and adapted for new times, in the living example that it's possible to live well by caring for the land and each other. But mainly, the miracle was in the certainty that this family, formed not by chance but by choice, would continue existing for generations, spreading seeds of hope wherever their children and grandchildren went. In 2020, when a global pandemic forced the planet to rethink its priorities, the property of the 3 orphaned children, now adults with their own families, became an even more valued refuge. While big cities faced isolation and scarcity, their life continued with the tranquility of those who always knew how to produce their own food and find happiness in simplicity. Juan Carlos, at 33 years old, had become a recognized specialist in regenerative agriculture. His techniques were studied by researchers from international universities. Miguel, now 10 years old, followed him through the plantations like a curious shadow, absorbing knowledge that would be impossible to learn in classrooms. "Dad, why are some city people afraid to touch the earth?" asked Miguel one morning, digging cassava seedlings. "Because they forgot we're made of earth," replied Juan Carlos. "And we always return home." Ana Paula, at 31 years old, had digitized her educational programs during the pandemic, reaching rural communities throughout Brazil through video classes transmitted by rural internet. Clarice, at 8 years old, already helped her mother recording small videos explaining how to care for plants and animals. "Mum, the screen doesn't smell the flowers," observed the girl during an online class about medicinal gardens. "That's why whoever watches has to plant their own flowers," replied Ana Paula, smiling. Fernanda, at 32 years old, coordinated a national network of traditional midwives and healers, connecting ancestral knowledge with modern technology. Luna and Saul, now 8 years old, already showed interest in their mother's work. Luna collected dried plants in scientifically organized notebooks. Saul liked talking to babies their mother helped deliver. "Today's children are born knowing things we had to learn," commented Antonio, watching the children play naturally among medicinal plants that had taken him years to know. Mr. Antonio, at 85 years old, had become a living legend. Journalists and researchers came from distant countries to record his stories about how 3 abandoned children created a sustainable life model that inspired communities worldwide. "I just did what any neighbor should do," he would say, with the modesty he maintained from always. "Care for those who need care." The property now extended over 40 hectares and employed 15 families from the region full-time. It had become a cooperative where all workers were partners and participated in profits. The economic model they developed was studied as an example of rural solidarity economy. "We don't want employees," Juan Carlos explained to visitors interested in the cooperative's functioning. "We want partners, people who care for the land as if it were theirs because it is." The property's international fame attracted investors interested in buying the brand or expanding the model to other regions. Millionaire offers were regularly made, all politely refused. "What do you want that you don't have?" asked a businessman from São Paulo during a visit. "Nothing," replied Ana Paula. "We have everything we want: family, land, purpose." In 2021, the property was included in a UN research on sustainable rural development models and served as a base for hunger-fighting policies in African and Asian countries. Government delegations from Mozambique, Cambodia, and Guatemala visited the property to learn techniques they could adapt to their local realities. "It's strange to know that what we learned here can help children on the other side of the world," commented Fernanda after a visit from farmers from Burkina Faso. "It's not strange," corrected Mr. Antonio. "It's natural. Kindness has no borders." The new generation children grew up multilingual, not from studying foreign languages, but from constantly living with visitors from different countries. Miguel spoke Portuguese, English, and Spanish with natural fluency. Clarice invented stories mixing characters from all cultures she knew through visitors. Luna and Sol played with indigenous dolls, African dolls, and European dolls with the same naturalness. "Our children are citizens of the world," said Carmen in an interview for an international magazine, "but they know their home is here." In 2022, the Francisco Almeida Rural Studies Center was inaugurated, a small university built on the neighboring property, where students from around the world came to take intensive courses on sustainable agriculture, rural education, and traditional medicine. The center was named after Juan Carlos and Ana Paula's father, in a tribute that deeply moved the siblings. "Dad would be proud," said Ana Paula at the inauguration, looking at the bronze plaque with Francisco's name. "He always said the land takes care of those who take care of it. Now it's taking care of people worldwide." But what most impressed academic visitors wasn't the advanced agricultural techniques or productivity numbers. It was the atmosphere of genuine peace and happiness that enveloped the entire property. "These people discovered the secret of human happiness," wrote a French anthropologist in his report. "They know that true prosperity isn't measured in money, but in solid human relationships and genuine connection with the land." An American reporter spent a month on the property documenting the family's routine for a documentary about alternatives to modern urban lifestyle. "What impresses me most," she said in the final interview, "is that you don't need anything from outside to be happy. You produce your food, build your houses, educate your children, care for each other's health. It's a model of self-sufficiency that the developed world has completely lost." "We just do what's always been natural," replied Juan Carlos. "Care for the land, care for family, care for neighbors." On winter nights, when the whole family gathered around the fireplace that had replaced the old wood-burning stove, Mr. Antonio still told stories to his great-grandchildren. His narratives now included visitors from exotic countries, revolutionary agricultural techniques, and international awards. But his favorite stories continued being about 3 orphaned children who transformed abandonment into love, loneliness into family, despair into hope. "And did they live happily ever after?" asked Sewell, as all children do at the end of stories. "They live happily ever after," corrected Mr. Antonio, smiling. "The story continues every day." In 2023, Mr. Antonio turned 86, and the family organized a celebration that lasted an entire week. People came from 12 countries, former visitors who considered the old farmer an adoptive father, researchers who had found inspiration in his stories, rural families who had applied techniques he had helped develop on their properties. During the celebration, Antonio asked to make a speech. "When I found 3 orphaned children in an abandoned house," he said, his voice still firm despite his age, I thought I was helping them. Now I know it was they who saved me. They gave me a larger family than I dreamed of having, a greater purpose than I imagined I deserved, a greater joy than I thought possible. Juan Carlos, Ana Paula, and Fernanda were in the front row, holding each other's hands as they did when they were small and afraid of getting lost. Mr. Cantonio, said Juan Carlos, standing to respond, you taught us that family isn't just who's born together, it's who chooses to stay together. It was during this celebration that news arrived that would once again change the property's destiny. The 2023 Nobel Peace Prize would be dedicated to local sustainable development initiatives that promote social peace. The property of the 3 orphaned children was among 10 experiences selected worldwide to receive official recognition. The news was received with a mixture of pride and perplexity. Nobel Prize, repeated Ana Paula, incredulous. Us? We just planted some vegetables, said Juan Carlos, scratching his head, and created a family, completed Fernanda, and helped other families and preserved traditions and taught sustainability and… All right, laughed Juan Carlos. Maybe we did more things than we thought. The recognition ceremony was held in Oslo, but the 3 siblings refused to travel to receive the prize personally. Our life is here, they explained in a video conference with the Nobel Committee. Our message is that happiness and prosperity are found where we create deep roots, not where we seek external recognition. The prize was symbolically delivered through a video conference transmitted worldwide, with the 3 siblings sitting on the porch of the original house, surrounded by their children, and with the mountains of Minas Gerais as backdrop. We dedicate this recognition, said Ana Paula, speaking for the family, to all orphaned children in the world, so they know that abandonment isn't destiny, and to all generous adults like our Mr. Antonio, so they understand the transformative power of a simple gesture of kindness. The speech was translated into 30 languages and watched by more than 100 million people. After the transmission, life on the property continued exactly as always. Children playing in the yard, chickens scratching, the garden needing daily care, cattle asking to be milked. You didn't change anything, observed a journalist who came to document the day after the Nobel. Why would we change? Asked Fernanda. We already had everything we wanted before the prize. Miguel, now 13 years old, had developed a special passion for agricultural technology. He created simple apps that helped small producers in the region calculate planting periods and harvest predictions. His combination of traditional knowledge inherited from his father with modern technological skills impressed specialized researchers. This boy is going to revolutionize agriculture, commented an agronomist engineer from Embrapa who came to see the boy's projects. Clarice, at 11 years old, had begun writing a book about stories she heard from international visitors. Her project was to create a collection of rural tales from around the world, showing how families from different countries faced challenges similar to those her family had overcome. All stories are the same deep down, she explained. They talk about people who help and love each other. Luna and Sul, at 11 years old, developed complementary talents. Luna specialized in botany and could identify hundreds of medicinal plants just by smell and touch. Sul had a natural gift for dealing with animals and could calm any creature with his gentle presence. These children carry DNA from our chosen family, said Fernanda, watching her children work with the same patience she had learned years ago. In 2024, the property received its first official delegation of astronauts. NASA was studying sustainable agriculture models for future space missions and wanted to learn the closed-circuit production techniques the family had developed. It's surreal, commented Juan Carlos, seeing American astronauts planting seedlings in his garden. Techniques we learned to survive in an abandoned house are now going to help people live in space. But the most special visit of that year was from a 45-year-old woman who appeared one autumn afternoon, driving a simple car and asking if she could visit the property. It was Marlene. The stepmother who had abandoned them 25 years ago was unrecognizable. Grey hair, deep wrinkles, trembling hands of someone who had carried heavy guilt for a long time. She began, stopping in front of Juan Carlos without being able to form words. Marlene, he said simply, and his voice carried no anger or resentment, just recognition. Ana Paula appeared from the garden, hands dirty with earth, and looked at the woman who had been her stepmother during the most difficult years of childhood. You've aged, she observed, with the direct honesty that had always characterized her. You've grown, murmured Marlene, her eyes traveling over the prosperous property, the well-kept houses, the children playing in the yard. Fernanda approached last, drying her hands on an apron. Marlene looked at her without recognizing her. "This is Fernanda," introduced Ana Paula. "Our sister, who came after you, left." "Ah," said Marlene, and in the simple word was recognition of everything she had lost. They invited her to lunch. Marlene ate in silence the food they themselves produced, observing family conversations, games among children, the natural harmony that existed among everyone. "I came to apologize," she said finally, "and to say that I did the right thing. Abandoning you, I mean. You created a better life than I could ever have given." "We know," said Juan Carlos gently, "and we're grateful." Marlene left the same day, after quickly hugging each of them. She never returned, but sent Christmas cards in following years, always signed simply, "With love and pride, Marlene." "She did what she knew how to do at the time," said Mr. Antonio that night, smoking his last corn husk cigarette before sleeping. "Sometimes love is letting go." "Like you did the opposite," observed Ana Paula. "Love is staying together." "Both things are true," replied the wise old man. "It depends on the situation and people involved." That night, the three families gathered on the porch as they had every night for 25 years. The new generation children listened to stories, asked questions, planned adventures for the next day. Mr. Antonio looked around the circle of people he called family, Juan Carlos and Carmen with their children, Ana Paula and Rafael with their girl, Fernanda and Antonio with the twins. 3 generations united by love, by land, and by the daily choice to care for each other. "Do you know what was my greatest gift in life?" he asked. "What, great-grandfather?" asked the children in chorus. "Seeing that love multiplies. When I offered care to 3 orphan children, I thought I was dividing the little I had. I discovered I was planting a seed that would grow beyond what any person can imagine. The dark mountains outlined the starry sky, eternal and silent, witnesses of a family that had formed not by chance, but by choice, a family that had grown not only in number, but in love, wisdom, and ability to spread kindness throughout the world. And in the stars that shone over Diamantina, it seemed the universe itself smiled at that small property, where 3 orphaned children learned that home isn't where we're born, but where we choose to stay and grow. In December 2024, on a hot summer afternoon in Minas Gerais, an unexpected visitor arrived at the property. Dr. Eduardo Martins was a lawyer from Belo Horizonte, elegant and formal, who asked to speak privately with Juan Carlos, Ana Paula, and Fernanda. "I come representing a client who preferred to maintain anonymity until now," he explained on the porch of the original house, where everything had begun 25 years before. The 3 siblings looked at each other, intrigued. Mr. Antonio, now 87 years old, was dozing in a rocking chair nearby, apparently oblivious to the conversation. "My client has followed your story for decades," continued the lawyer, "and the time has come to reveal something that may change your understanding of your own lives." Dr. Eduardo opened a leather folder and removed yellow documents, old photographs, and handwritten letters. "Francisco Almeida dos Santos, your father, wasn't just a common farmer. He was a member of a traditional Diamantina family that had lost their properties during the economic crisis of the 1980s. Juan Carlos frowned. "Dad never mentioned a rich family, because he chose to live simply. But when he died, he left more than just these 25 hectares. He left rights to a family inheritance that had been in litigation for decades." The lawyer showed documents that seemed old and important: deeds, wills, property certificates for lands extending over hundreds of hectares in the region. The Almeida dos Santos family was one of Diamantina's founders. They owned farms, colonial houses, even participation in diamond mines. Everything was lost or sold during economic crises, but some legal rights remained. Ana Paula looked at the documents as if they were maps of a lost treasure. "What does this mean for us?" "It means," said Dr. Eduardo solemnly, "that you are heirs of one of the region's most traditional families, and that the judicial litigation has finally been resolved in your favor." The silence that followed was so deep they could hear the Bemtevis singing in the jabuticaba tree. How much money are we talking about?" asked Fernanda cautiously. "Approximately 40 million reais in properties, investments, and accumulated compensations." The figure echoed on the porch like distant thunder. Juan Carlos got up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking at the mountains he had known since childhood. "And who is your client?" asked Ana Paula. "Who has been following our story all these years?" Dr. Eduardo smiled for the first time. Someone who knows you very well. Mr. Antonio slowly opened his eyes as if waking from a nap, but his gaze was alert and bright. I think I can answer that question, he said, rising from the chair with the surprising agility of someone who had been pretending to sleep. The three siblings turned to him, confused. Antonio Benedito Almeida dos Santos, said the old man, taking a document from his shirt. Francisco's uncle, your grandfather by adoption, and last legal representative of the Almeida dos Santos family. The world seemed to stop. Mr. Antonio, whispered Ana Paula. I'm your grandfather, child. Biological grandfather of your father, adoptive grandfather of you. Francisco was my younger brother's son, who died when the boy was 15. I helped raise him. Juan Carlos sat heavily in a chair. You always knew who we were? I always knew. When Francisco died and Marlene stayed with you, I began investigating the situation. When she abandoned you, it wasn't coincidence that I passed by here the next day. I was watching from afar, waiting for the right moment to act. Fernanda shook her head, incredulous. So everything was planned. Not everything, said Antonio, and his voice carried the emotion of years of kept secrets. I didn't plan for you to become such extraordinary people. I didn't plan for you to create such a beautiful family. I didn't plan for you to transform a small property into a model for the entire world. But why didn't you tell us before? Asked Juan Carlos. Antonio looked at the flourishing property, at the houses where his three families lived, at the grandchildren playing in the yard. Because you needed to discover your own strength. If you had known from the beginning that you had a rich grandfather taking care of you, you would never have developed the courage, unity, determination that made you who you are. Ana Paula began crying silently. You let us think we were completely alone orphans. You were never alone. I was always here. But you needed to believe in yourselves before believing in inheritances and fortunes. Dr. Eduardo watched the family scene with the respect of someone witnessing something very particular and profound. There's one more thing, said Antonio. The family inheritance includes the original deed to all these mountains you love. About 1,000 hectares that always belonged to our family and are now officially yours. 1,000 hectares? Repeated Fernanda. And a colonial mansion in Diamantina's historic center, and participation in a mining cooperative that still functions, and investments that grew for decades in Sao Paulo banks. The silence returned, even heavier. Juan Carlos looked at his calloused hands, thinking of all the days he had awakened worried about money, about the future, about security. Ana Paula thought of all the nights she had slept, worried about whether they could maintain the property, educate the children, care for each other in old age. Fernanda thought of her childhood in the orphanage, of the years she spent believing she had no family or place in the world. We're rich, said Ana Paula finally. You always were rich, corrected Antonio. Rich in love, in unity, in purpose. Money is just official confirmation. And now, asked Juan Carlos, what do we do with all this? Antonio smiled. What you've always done, take care of the land, take care of family, take care of neighbors. You just now have resources to take care of many more people. Dr. Eduardo began explaining legal details, investment possibilities, fiscal responsibilities, but the three siblings barely listened. They were looking at Mr. Antonio, their grandfather, with a mixture of gratitude, love, and understanding that 25 years of living together finally made complete sense. You were never just our neighbor, said Ana Paula. Never just our guardian, completed Juan Carlos. Never just our protector, finished Fernanda. Always our family, said the three together. That night they gathered everyone on the porch to tell the news. The new generation children listened with wide eyes to the story of the secret grandfather, the hidden inheritance, the millions they now possessed. Are we going to be princes? Asked Saul, excited. You already were princes, said Antonio, picking up his grandson. Princes of the land, princes of family, princes of love. And now we can help even more people, said Miguel, always practical like his father. Exactly, agreed Ana Paula. Now we can make our family even bigger. Clarice was quiet, absorbing the information. Grandpa Antonio, she said finally, you're like characters in stories Mom tells. You seem like one thing, but you're something much more important. We're all like that, my little granddaughter, he replied. Sometimes we seem like abandoned orphans, but we're heirs of love. Sometimes we seem poor, but we're rich in purpose. Luna, always observant, asked the question on everyone's mind. Are we going to change anything? The adults looked at each other. We're going to be able to do more good things, said Fernanda. We're going to be able to help more families, said Ana Paula. We're going to be able to preserve more land, said Juan Carlos. But our home continues being here, said the three together, looking at the original house where everything had begun. Antonio smiled. His grandchildren had passed the final test. Money wouldn't change who they were. It would only amplify their capacity to be good. The secret he had kept for 25 years had finally been revealed, and the revelation only confirmed that the family they had built with love was stronger than any inheritance of blood or money. In the mountains of Minas Gerais, under a starry sky that had witnessed the transformation of 3 orphaned children into world leaders in sustainability, the Almeida dos Santos family prepared to write new chapters of their extraordinary story, now with resources to dream even bigger. In March 2025, exactly 26 years after that rainy morning when Marlene left and 3 children woke thinking they were completely alone in the world, the Almeida dos Santos property celebrated its most ambitious transformation, the creation of the Francisco Foundation, an organization destined to replicate their sustainable rural development model in orphaned and abandoned communities around the world. Juan Carlos, at 38 years old, had become International Director of Agricultural Projects for the Foundation. Ana Paula, at 36, coordinated educational programs in 17 countries. Fernanda, at 37, led a worldwide traditional medicine network, serving more than 500,000 people. The colonial mansion in Diamantina had been transformed into the Foundation's administrative headquarters, but the 3 siblings continued living on the original property in the houses they built with their own hands. Home is where we plant roots, Juan Carlos would tell visitors, who were surprised he hadn't moved to the city. And our roots are here, Mr. Antonio, now 88 years old, spent his days on the original house's porch, receiving grandchildren and great-grandchildren who came to hear his stories. His health was fragile, but his mind remained clear as crystal. "Grandpa," asked Miguel one afternoon, now 15 years old, "do you regret keeping the secret about our family for so long?" Antonio smiled, looking at the boy who had inherited his father's scientific curiosity and the family's natural kindness. "Never, my grandson. You learn to be rich by being poor. You learn to be family by being orphans. You learn to be strong by being abandoned. If I had told everything from the beginning, maybe you would never have learned those lessons." The Francisco Foundation had already established projects in 42 countries. In Kenya, drought-orphaned children learned agriculture resistant to arid climate. In Guatemala, indigenous communities developed bilingual education systems inspired by Ana Paula's work. In India, traditional midwives were trained by video conference with Fernanda. "It's like we're planting seeds of our family everywhere," observed Clarice, now 13 years old and already helping translate educational materials to different languages. Luna and Saul, at 15 years old, had developed unique talents. Luna had created an app that identified medicinal plants through photographs, already used by rural communities in 30 countries. Saul coordinated an exchange program that brought young people from communities assisted by the Foundation to learn at the original property. "You're the 3rd generation of our family," said Fernanda to her children one morning, "and you're already changing the world more than we ever imagined." In April 2025, news arrived that would deeply move the entire family. The Francisco Foundation had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, but this time, more important news arrived the same day. Mr. Antonio was sick. The town doctor was clear. Lung cancer, result of decades smoking corn husk cigarettes. Treatment could prolong his life a few months, but wouldn't change the final outcome. "How many months?" asked Ana Paula, holding her grandfather's hand. "Maybe 6, replied the doctor. "Maybe less." Antonio heard the diagnosis with the serenity of someone who had already lived much longer than expected. 88 years is enough time for any person," he said, "and I had the luck to live the last 26 as your grandfather." The family gathered to decide how to face those final months. Offers of treatment at famous hospitals in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro were considered and refused. "Grandpa wants to stay here," said Juan Carlos, "and here is where he's going to stay." Fernanda used all the palliative medicine knowledge she had developed over the years. Ana Paula organized a schedule, so there would always be someone from the family beside Antonio. Juan Carlos adapted the original house to make it more comfortable. Mr. Antonio's last months were a celebration of the life he had built, together with his chosen family. Visitors from all continents came to say goodbye to the man who had inspired their transformations. Former presidents, Nobel laureates, religious leaders, simple farmers, all made pilgrimages to the small property in Minas Gerais. "He's not just our grandfather," said Saul in an interview for an international television network. "He's grandfather to everyone who learned that love multiplies when it's shared." In August 2025, on a golden winter afternoon in Minas Gerais, Mr. Antonio called the three grandchildren for a final conversation. He was lying in the bed he himself had built decades ago, surrounded by the mountains he had loved his whole life, with gentle breeze bringing the smell of flowers Ana Paula had planted in his garden. "Do you know what was my greatest pride in life?" he asked, his voice weak but calm. "What, Grandpa?" asked the three, as they had asked so many times when they were children. "Seeing that the love I offered three orphan children transformed into a family that embraces the entire world. Seeing that kindness planted in a small yard grew and is feeding people on continents I didn't even know existed." João Carlos held one of his grandfather's hands. Ana Paula held the other. Fernanda put her hand over both. "Thank you," said Antonio, "for letting me be your father, for giving me grandchildren and great-grandchildren, for transforming my old age into the happiest time of my life." "Thank you," they replied, "for believing in us when we didn't even believe in ourselves, for teaching us that family is built with love, not blood, for showing us that home is where we choose to plant our happiness." Antonio smiled one last time. "Take care of the land," he whispered. "Take care of each other. Take care of the world." He died sleeping that night, surrounded by the family he loved, in the house where he had chosen to live, on the land he had cared for like a garden, under the stars he had observed for 88 years. The funeral lasted a week and gathered people from 50 countries. But the most important ceremony was the simple one. The three siblings planted a purple ipe sapling over their grandfather's grave, next to the pitanga tree cemetery, where they had buried Thunder years ago. "Now they're together again," said Clarice, crying. "Grandpa and Thunder, taking care of our family from heaven." In reading the will, they discovered Antonio had left everything to the Francisco Foundation, with one condition, that the original property never be sold, always be inhabited by family descendants, and continue being a living example that love and work can transform any abandonment into prosperity. "He knew," said Ana Paula, reading the grandfather's last words, "that we would never leave here anyway." In December 2025, the Francisco Foundation officially received the Nobel Peace Prize for demonstrating that sustainable development and social peace begin with strong families and united communities. The three siblings traveled to Oslo to receive the prize, but returned the same day. "Our life is here," they explained, repeating words they had said years before. That night, the whole family gathered on the original house porch to celebrate, 4 generations sitting in the same place where 3 orphaned children had learned to survive, grown together, built a family, created a legacy that now inspired the entire world. Miguel, at 15 years old, was developing agricultural technologies that would be implemented for climate refugees. Clarice, at 13, wrote children's books translated into dozens of languages, teaching children about sustainability. Luna created apps that connected traditional knowledge with modern science. Saul coordinated exchange programs that spread seeds of love through forgotten communities. "The 5th generation is already being born," said Ana Paula, caressing her belly where her second child was growing. "And the 6th is already being dreamed," said Fernanda, watching Luna draw projects for a rural school she wanted to build. João Carlos looked around the porch, at the wife he loved, at the siblings he had chosen, at the children he educated, at the land he cultivated, at the mountains that protected him. "Do you know what I learned in these 26 years?" he asked. "What?" everyone replied. "I learned that an orphan isn't someone who loses parents. An orphan is someone who loses the capacity to love and be loved. And family isn't those born together. Family is those who choose to grow together. And I learned," said Ana Paula, "that home isn't where we're born. Home is where we plant roots and watch them grow." "And I learned," said Fernanda, "that inheritance isn't what we inherit from ancestors. Inheritance is what we leave for future generations." The new generation children listened, absorbing lessons they would carry for life and transmit to their own children. In the eternal mountains of Minas Gerais, where 3 orphaned children discovered that abandonment can transform into belonging, loneliness into family, despair into hope, the story continued being written, because true love has no end. It only transforms, multiplies, spreads through the world like seeds in the wind, creating new families, new communities, new homes wherever it finds fertile ground, and the most fertile ground that exists is a human heart willing to care for another human heart. The Almeida dos Santos family had discovered the secret of human happiness, that we are all orphans until we find our chosen tribe, and that home isn't a geographical place, but an emotional state where we are loved for who we are and challenged to become everything we can be. In the stars that shone over Diamantina that December night, it seemed the universe itself celebrated a family that began with 3 children abandoned on a rainy morning and transformed into a worldwide network of love, care, and hope. And somewhere among the stars, Mr. Antonio and Thunder watched with infinite pride the family they had helped plant, knowing that the seeds of love that germinated in that small yard would continue growing and spreading throughout the world forever.